Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Canada Hoops. It's your boy, Matty. Thank you for your continued support. Please keep downloading and sharing us. Tell a friend to tell a friend. It is a true privilege to have today's guest joining us. He represents Tillsonburg and Niagara Falls, Ontario. He is a Simon Fraser legend. He was the first Canadian born head coach in the NBA when he was the head coach for the Toronto Raptors, and he is currently an assistant coach for the Sacramento Kings. And of course, he has cemented himself true legend status with Canada basketball, both as a player and a coach. He is Mr. J. Triano. J, thank you so much for joining us on Canada Hoops.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Great to talk to you, Matty.
Yeah, we'll let the listeners know. Some of them know that we tried to record last, I think, late summer, fall. There, we had some audio issues, but Jay has been gracious enough to join us and tell his story, especially for our Canada basketball listeners. How are things, Jay? Let our listeners, your fans, know how you're doing and how life is right now, man.
Things are great. Out here in Sacramento, I didn't expect this. I thought we had a pretty good run in Charlotte. We were getting better every year, but it's crazy NBA things happen. And I was fortunate that Mike Brown, called me and asked me to come out here and help run the offense for him. And, uh, you know, they had their struggles in Sacramento for a long time. So it was a place that I wasn't sure, but I love the challenge of rebuilding, and Mike was great. And we finished up our first year here, and it was a good year. I've had a couple of weeks of downtime now, and then guys are already back in the gym. We got pre-draft workouts, and we're starting our prep for not only the draft but for summer league. So it's just like never-ending circle of the season keeps going.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I just wanted to ask kind of just a little bit about the season and ultimately the tough first round loss to Golden State in 7 games. What were the guys, the players saying about the season and just obviously disappointed with the result. But what's been the mindset coming out of that?
I think anytime you lose, it's disappointing. And it took actually a little bit of time for us to, step back from it a little bit and recognize what we had done, something that hadn't been done for 17 years here in Sacramento, was to get into the playoffs. And when we look at where we were, coming into the season, I think a lot of us had low expectations, but, Mike set the tone real early for us and never talked about anything other than, you know, not getting into the play-in game or anything like that. Championship aspirations. And there were so many times throughout the first month of the season, the second month of the season, where he would stop things and say, this is not how champions do it. And he had been, obviously successful with the Cavaliers and with the Warriors prior to coming to Sacramento. And, he just stopped things when things weren't going the way that he wanted them to and the way that championship teams aspire to. And I think, for the players that had been here in the past, they were hungry. They were hungry to eliminate the stigma that went with Sacramento Kings. And Mike established right away that we weren't going to be that team anymore. And it was fun. It made it for a great environment to coach in. Mike is demanding and detailed. And for the first time in a lot of years, I was super nervous going into practices at times because I've done this for 27 years, but Mike's looking over my shoulder and he goes, Jay, is that how they want to do it? And I would be like, well, he's supposed to cut. Stop it then and correct them. And he was just like on me as much as he was on players. And I've never been around a coach that jumped on his star players as much as Mike did. But, in the end, it was a great year for us. We broke a lot of records. We had Executive of the Year, Coach of the Year. We won the division. But the playoffs still sting. I mean, we thought we were the team. We were an open 3 away from going up 3-1 and coming home, and then we end up losing to the Warriors in 7. So that always stings, but that's the hunger that's going to provide us to get better as we go through the summer and move forward.
Awesome. Yeah, I felt like I kind of was really locked in on the Kings all season. I watched as many games as I could, knowing that you were in charge of the offense, following Trey because he's Canadian.
Yeah.
So I was disappointed too. I was really hungry for you guys and
Yeah.
rallying, and I know the Kings have a bright future with that roster and the coaching staff. Jay, before we get into your story, I just want to ask you about your book that you wrote. It's been a few years now.
Yeah.
Open Look, Canadian Basketball and Me. And for our listeners, I'm sure many of them have the book, and hopefully they do. You know, how did the book come to fruition? How was that a long process? Just take us through that, man.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I didn't even, I never even thought of writing a book or doing this. And Simon and Schuster came to me and said, what we see is the growth of Canada basketball right now, and it's going to get better, and it's going to keep getting better. But we don't know, and I don't think a lot of the players know to this day what it was like and how it got on the map in the beginning. And they talked to me about being a partner, and with um, being a player for so many years. I think I played the second most games of anybody in the history of the national team, to second only to Eli Pasquale. And then to go into being a coach for on two different occasions. I've represented the country a lot, so I've seen it from the beginning right to where it is right now with so many great players in our country. So I sat down with Mike Grange and we just started hammering out the details of what happened this year, how I got involved with the national team in the first place, and what it was like to coach the national team. And it ended up turning into a book called Open Look. And it was actually a lot of fun to do that with Mike, because it made me sit back and reminisce on a lot of the great times that I had representing the country and playing for Jack Donahue, and then moving into a coaching role, having this success at the 2000 Olympics. And again, anytime you don't win, you still have that hunger and that desire to want to go back and do it again and do better. So it was a great reflection for me to write that book.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, obviously, I nerd out on that stuff, and the title is very fitting, in my opinion. Sort of a historical timeline of the program, obviously your career, and you talk a lot about Jack and Steve Nash on that 2000 Olympic team, and Michael Grange is a friend of ours, and he's joined us. You mentioned the games played. I just want to shout out a friend of ours on Twitter who's tracked the amount of games played. Nick Ruzick. He he has you as the most games played, Jay, just with
Oh, is that right?
official and then potentially unofficial. So
Yeah.
107 official, 120 unofficial. With sometimes they don't count the Pan Am games or university games, and then
Gotcha.
you are ahead of the late great Eli Pasquale. So I thought that was cool, and I want to
Yeah.
shout Nick out because he supports us, and
That's great.
it's fitting you have the most games.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Back then, when Jack put together the teams, we were it was the national team for the whole summer. So it would be the World University Games, it would be the Pan American Games, it'd be an Olympic qualifying, or the Olympics, or the World Championships, and we were together for 3 months at a time. Like when our college seasons ended, or when we were playing pro overseas and we came back, we'd get together in the summertime, and it'd be like, when do we get a week off to go home? And there were like maybe two of them, but we would practice 3 times a day, sometimes early on. And I think that was a part of the success that we had. I mean, people forget that, in 1984, we were fourth in the world. We qualified for the 80 Olympics. We were always in the top 10 at the World Championships. And the success was because we were together. We were a team. We knew each other, and played together so many games together. And I think that was part of the reason. It wasn't a piecemeal team that you put together and try to go out and win a tournament. It was our national team was our national team for a long period of time.
Yeah, and it set the path for the program to grow and grow. Just a special time. Jay, I'm hoping we can run it back to a young Howie running around Tillsonburg and Niagara Falls. What was life like there for you, and then how did basketball start to take shape for you?
Well, I think, my dad moved from Niagara Falls to Tillsonburg to play for the Tillsonburg Livingstons, which was, his way of kind of trying to be a pro, really, because the Livingstons would sponsor a team that could keep playing. So he was a high school teacher in the area who played. Um, and back then, if you won the national championships, you got to go to the Olympic Games or the Pan American Games. So, you know, when my dad did that in 1959 and played in the Pan American Games against Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, um, I was one, and sure enough, 20 years later, I get to play in the Pan American Games in 1979, and
Cool.
it just was like it was a full circle for our family. But grow up in a basketball, and my dad was a coach after he stopped playing. So I was always at the other end of the gym, always around the game, always around teams and coaches. So in my early childhood, and was great. And Tillsonburg had so many great players. David Coulthard was from there, and we just kind of. I ended up moving back to Niagara Falls and having a good high school basketball career where, Niagara Falls was great. I mean, A.N. Meyer, when you think about that school, we got together at the 2000 Olympics, and I was the coach. Greg Newton was on the team. Peter Garashi was on the team, and Nikki Johnson was on the women's team. And so, if you count those four people, all from the same high school,
Wow.
representing at the Olympics. I mean, it's hard to get four people from the same city, at an Olympic Games. We had four that went not only just a small town, Niagara Falls, but they was from the same high school. So obviously, growing up in a basketball environment in a basketball friendly city was a big thing for me.
And I think you were a pretty good baseball player too. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think I was very good, but I was on a team that was really good. How
Oh,
about
okay.
that?
Okay.
Um, I was a utility kind of player, first baseman. For being 6'4", never really had a lot of power, but I'd slap the ball to the other side of the infield and try to beat it out. But yeah, won the Canadian Championships one year in Niagara Falls at the midget level, and it was exciting. I still to this day, I love watching them and playing the game of baseball.
Do you got a favorite team or player like back then or now in baseball? I love baseball too. So
Yeah, I think I've always been a fan of Joey Votto.
nice.
Because he's a Toronto kid. When I was coaching the Raptors, he would use our facility sometimes to come in. Followed his career, obviously, but I'm a Blue Jay fan through and through. Even out here in Sacramento, I have major league package, and I watch as many Blue Jay games as I can. I got home last week to visit my mom and my sister, and got to go to a game. So I try to catch as many games as I could. When I lived in Toronto, I was pretty regular at a lot of the baseball games. It was kind of like just a down thing for me to I can get away from the game, go and relax and watch another sport. And I'm always intrigued by how baseball teaches because they have so many games and so few practices. And I think the NBA is becoming a little bit like that. With this rest management, we really don't practice a whole lot. The whole idea is get ready for games. And I want to study the game of baseball to see how they teach so much during a season that very very few days off. So
Yeah, good insight. I mean, it's cool that you can correlate the two games together. I'm just wondering when you're growing up there and playing hoops, who did you look up to on the basketball court? Obviously, your dad was an influence, but anybody else in the community or the national team, whose game did you really
well,
like?
I don't know if there was really a players that when I first started playing on the national team, I was like. And I got into it, but the Buffalo Braves being right across the border was an NBA team, and I feel blessed that I was so close to the border because we didn't really get many games in Canada back then on TV. But Pete Maravich was a game. I think the Buffalo Braves would play 10 games a year at Maple Leaf Gardens, and I got to go. My first NBA game that I went to, it was Pete Maravich, and just being a 6'4" skinny white kid, that was I could be that guy. And I'm
Right.
watching him play, and he had 44 points that night, and he wore the number 44. And I remember going home and I cut the elastics out of my socks because I wanted to be Pistol Pete Maravich because he always had the droopy socks. And as time went, I became more of a fan of the Buffalo Braves and Ernie DiGregorio and Randy Smith, Gar Hurd, Jim McMillan, and Bob McAdoo was the starting five. And that was a basketball environment that I could relate to because it was close. So I became a fan of the game there through the NBA, but never imagined, growing up in Niagara Falls and not even knowing if could or if I would play college basketball, that I would spend so many years working in the NBA when I was just a fan running to those games.
Cool. I'm wondering. You mentioned college. How did that next level start to shape up for you, just in terms of um, obviously wanting to do that, but recruitment?
Yeah.
I know very different back then. Just take us through that and how that shaped out for you.
Well, the coach at Simon Fraser University was probably the most consistent with sending cards, letters, newsletters, phone calls, and sending me things all the time that I knew about Simon Fraser University. And actually, uh, I saw a game being played at Niagara University across from where I grew up, and it was the Canadian national team, and they were getting ready for the 1976 Olympics. And at that game, they had 3 players on the roster that were from Simon Fraser. And
Wow.
so Simon Fraser kind of stuck in my mind a little bit that, hey, they must be doing something right. And then when I started getting recruited by them, obviously my interest increased and I started following it. And then it just became a no-brainer for me. It was where I wanted to go. Stan Stewartson came to recruit me, and I said, "No, I'm coming." He goes, "Well, I think there's a lot of schools that want to talk to you." And I said, "No, you've got more guys on the national team than anybody. That's what I want to do." So obviously, this is the right environment for me. So I remember, deciding that that's when I was going to go to Simon Fraser and I was going to follow the footsteps of those players that I had seen play 2 years earlier or a year earlier as they were getting ready for the Olympic Games.
Yeah, I mean, it just speaks to back then the national team was so coveted, right? It was like the highest level for a lot of players. So I just think that's cool. I mean, obviously our top players now have different priorities and responsibilities, but to to look back then, I mean, that was um, the top level. So it just made a lot of sense for you.
Yeah, no, it's funny, Matty, because I think back then too, I grew up in a family where we were riveted to the TV anytime the Olympic Games were on, and
Right.
the pride that we all felt when we saw a Canadian do well, and the fact that if I can be on the national team and have a chance to go to the Olympic Games, that would be the best thing ever. So, there was always that sense of national pride where I wanted to be an Olympian. Now, and when it got taken away in 1980 because of the boycott, I was fortunate enough to play in the next two. So would have been 3 Olympic teams, and something again that as a kid you dream about, but you never expect is going to happen in your life. And sure enough, I was very, very fortunate.
Jay, you're regarded as an all-time great at Simon Fraser. When you look back at your time on Burnaby Mountain, what memories stick out the most for you there?
I think the biggest thing to me was the fraternity of athletes and how much they excelled in every sport. Bob Molly was a silver medalist at the Olympics as a wrestler. Chris Wilson went to the Olympics. We had so many different sports. It was the number one school for putting players in the CFL. Um, there were national team players coming out from both the men's and the women's program. And I just remember the fraternity of athletes. And I think when you surround yourself with other people that are striving for excellence in something, that's when you're going to be best prepared to be excellent. And I looked at all these different athletes training and the dedication and the time that they put in. That to me was the key. And then, of course, the story of Terry Fox and me becoming friends with Terry Fox almost my first day there as a student, and then watching him be part of our team, watching him decide the next year that he was going to run across Canada on one leg. Following that, just kind of was. If I wasn't motivated enough, then this guy who ran over a marathon a day to raise money, was probably one of the most humble guys ever. If I didn't learn anything from being around those other great athletes, I sure learned from what Terry's story was and how great he was of an athlete and an icon in Canada he was, and to be able to call him my friend just is beyond belief to me, really.
Yeah, I mean, he should be regarded as our best athlete ever in Canada, and he needs to be on some currency for sure. I
Mhm.
think you're still the all-time point scored leader for Simon Fraser too, if I'm correct.
I think I'm number 2 now. I
Oh
think
no.
the year, yeah, I'll put an asterisk beside it, but Brent Charlton, who played at Simon Fraser after I played, got an extra year because they moved to the CIS for 1 year.
Right.
So in his 5 years, he passed my 4-year total. So there's an asterisk, but I cannot take claim to being the highest scorer anymore because he played there for 5 years and he outscored me. So congrats to him.
This is a small world, but I played against him on provincial teams at Nike National, so I know the name and I know the player, and he could fill it up for sure. What did turning pro look like then at that time, Jay? Like you finished up at Simon Fraser. Just take us through that process, man.
Well, and back then, I mean, I'm so thrilled that we have a professional league in our country right now, and I got to go to one of the training camps last week when I was back home for a bit. I know that the season has just started. Your Calgary team is off to a great start, which I know you're excited about. But you know what? We didn't have that. And I kept saying, all the countries that I got to travel around playing with our national team had pro leagues. And all their athletes had a chance to play in the off season and get ready for the national team. We never had it. So we always had to farm our players. We had to go other countries and play, try to find jobs, try to stay in shape, try to be as connected to the game as we could in times. I ended up going to Mexico with Howard Kelsey and Jim Zote. So we put 3 of our national team players on one team down in Mexico and went down there. And that was our way of staying together and helping grow the national team a little bit. So that part was fun. I did that for a couple of years. And then I got offered a job when they put the 3-point line in 1984, after the 1984 Olympics. I was playing senior men's ball, trying to stay active, and I made a bunch of threes down in Colorado Springs, and a guy yelled from the stands. He goes, "Triano, do you want to come to Turkey?" And I was like, no. I mean, because back then all I knew was Midnight Express and, the jail system and how rough a country it was. And then the guy yelled, "We'll give you $40,000. And I said, "I'm on my way." And I signed a deal to go play for Fenerbahce, one of the famed clubs in Turkey right now. But back then, that is how you kind of got a job. And I went over there and played. And what it did was it bridged the gap for me to get from one Olympics to another and stay active playing the game and playing professionally and making a little bit of money. So it was fun. I look back, it was one of the greatest years of my life, is experiencing living in another country. And, the thoughts that I had of Turkey without having visited the place were completely opposite after having lived there for a year. Absolutely loved my time there, loved the city, loved the team, and just that whole experience was phenomenal.
So at that time too, you're obviously mixing in full summers with the national team, and the national team was obviously still a big priority for you. And then when you're done your playing career, you're the head coach at Simon Fraser for a bit as well, correct?
Yeah. When the Olympics ended in '88, and I didn't see myself. I couldn't see myself. Everything I did was based on the Olympic Games. I couldn't see myself going 4 more years and trying to find jobs. And, I needed to start moving on with my life. And my former coach was coach at Simon Fraser. He invited me back and said, "If you come back and be an assistant for a year, then we can, see where that takes us, see if you enjoy this." And sure enough, I did. I went back and I was an assistant for a year, worked on my teaching certificate, and ended up loving it, and took over the next year. And coached at Simon Fraser for 6 years until the Vancouver Grizzlies came to town.
Yeah, take us through that, because that was a cool opportunity, and if I'm correct, that was really the start of your NBA career.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah, obviously I was excited that NBA basketball was coming, and I applied to be the athletic director at Simon Fraser, and I think they narrowed it down to the final 2. I got into the final 2. There was something in the newspaper, and Stu Jackson saw it and said, "Are you thinking of not coaching?" I said, "No, I was thinking of coaching." He goes, "Oh, because if you were thinking of not coaching, we'd like to get you involved with the Vancouver Grizzlies." I said, "Well, what did you have in mind?" And hey, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was the director of community relations, and I was doing TV and radio broadcasts for all the games. And I was like, "This is the NBA. It's at the highest level. I want to get involved." And so I was the only one who saw every single game of the Vancouver Grizzlies for all 6 years, both home and away. Called them all on either radio or TV, and that was a great experience. And in and amongst that time is when the national team wasn't doing so well. They were at the World Championships. They hadn't done well. And, you know, a bunch of the players called me, a couple of the board members called me and said, would you be interested in coaching? And I said, initially I said, no. I mean, the NBA is 82 games a year. It's taking me away from my family and so on. And then I think it was Steve and Nash and a couple of the players knocked on the door and said, you know, we need a little discipline. We need you to come in and steer this in the right direction. And before I knew it, I was coaching the Canadian national team and had a had a 6-year plan because it was 1999, and I didn't think, you know, in 1 year we could get to the Olympic Games. We'd have to build a program, and the goal was going to be 2004. But you know, who knew that we would put together such an incredible team in 1999, and the next year we qualify for the 2000 Olympics, and we go to the Olympic Games. And I think that there is what really changed my coaching. You know, when we go 5-2 at an Olympic Games, I think people look at you and go, you know, we beat Russia, who was actually Russia at the time. It wasn't a divided nation.
Right.
We beat Spain by almost 20 points. We beat Australia, the host country, on their own court, getting into the NBA. It was because of the success of the Olympic Games.
Yeah, I mean, that was my love affair start really for the national team and the program. And you guys had an exhibition game in Vancouver prior to going to Sydney against like a small Div 2 school. And because we were playing Nike Nationals there. And so all the teams at the tournament were 18-year-old kids, got tickets. And so that was obviously we watched the NBA and we loved it. But I just remember seeing you on the sideline, Steve, Mike Meeks, Todd, Rowan, and I was like, these guys are representing. I just was hooked, right? And representing our country and staying up late in college, my first year playing and watching you guys at 2 or 3 in the morning. I mean, it was a special time, and it was just so cool to see the success that so many guys had after that. You included, obviously, where you started your coaching time. You eventually become the head coach of the Raptors after being assistant. Just take me through that, because that was a big deal. First Canadian-born head coach. You know, how much did you make of that, or were you just trying to stay locked in on the job every day?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had been in Toronto for, I think, 6.5 years as an assistant coach with a variety of other head coaches, Lenny Wilkins and Kevin O'Neill and Sam Mitchell. You know, you don't really even notice what's happening, but you know, we get off to a slow start that year, and I remember Mark Eversley and Brian Colangelo knocking on my door and was like, we're going to make a coaching change and we'd like you to take over. And it was just like, holy smokes, your mind just shifts from, you know, you only shift over 18 inches on the bench, but I'll tell you, your mind takes a different turn, and you got to think about everything all at once. How am I, what changes am I going to make? Obviously I was an assistant coach, so I had a part in what was happening. So you feel bad that things weren't going maybe the way you feel ownership in a guy getting fired. So I made sure that I talked to Sam first, and you know, he was like, no, you should take, you know, they're going to offer it to you, take it, you know, you got to take, that's what this business is about. And you know, then you start moving forward. What's your first meeting going to be? What is the message to the team going to be? You know, obviously looking for a rallying cry here. And I never even thought, I'm a Canadian and I'm doing this. I mean, obviously I had thought about that before, and I thought about leaving the Raptors to be an assistant coach other places. And Brian was just like, Brian to me was just like, no, you're not here because you're Canadian. He said, you're here because you're a good coach. I would have got rid of you a long time ago. I would have let you go. We want you here. So that always made me feel good. But I also knew that eventually I'd have to leave. The Raptors. You're not going to be with one organization, only one organization, your whole career. But to be honest, Matt, I never even thought, like, I'm a Canadian and I'm doing this, and I'm the first Canadian to ever coach. I think I was the first coach outside of the United States to be an NBA coach. And you know, just when you sit back and think about it, man, what a great honor and what a great pathway, hopefully, for more Canadians. And you know, I always felt like, you know, my gym was always open. I would any way I could help coaches. I had so many coaches help me by coming in and watching and observing and practice. I would always do that. But to be honest, I never even really thought about it or had time to think about it. I think you're so consumed in the day to day of what the game is about. You're dealing with media, you're dealing with agents, you're dealing with GMs, you're dealing with your players, whether they're playing or whether they're not playing. It just consumes you from the minute you wake up to the time you go to bed, and then half the time while you're sleeping is still consuming you. So it was tough, and you don't really get to relish sometimes your own accomplishments.
Yeah, I mean, you've maintained a coaching position in the league. What is it, almost 27 years, I think now. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. People value your ability and your knowledge. You know, as how do you reflect on that? Your time in the NBA, Jay. Like you've become just a real, if like a
Yes.
pedestal kind of guy, where there's other coaches that are looking to do that now. I've had Scott Morrison join us, and
Yeah.
Scott shouted you out because you've helped him out, and Nate Mitchell's with the Raptors. I'm not sure if he's staying there, but you know, do you get a chance to think about that impact on the coaching side?
I do, and I know we celebrate players, and that's what the game is about. Man, I wish we could celebrate our coaches in our country more. I think we have great coaches in our country, and my hope is that I know Scott's going to be on the front of a bench next year, and I hope that Nate stays in the game, and
Right.
we just got to keep building our Canadian coaches. We've built the players, and I hope that breaking the ice has helped it, and that Steve being a coach, we've had two guys that have been head coaches of Canadians in the NBA, which is great, and hopefully we can continue to keep growing that. But it's such a small fraternity of people, but the number of Canadians that are in the NBA now in different capacities is growing as well, and I think we should celebrate all of them. We got Mark Eversley as a GM now in Chicago. We've got video coordinators across the league. We've got health and performance people, Danny Langford in Golden State, and I'm just naming her because we just played them. But there's so many Canadians all across right now, and it's not just about our players. I mean, our players open our what do you say? They're like the profile that gets us recognized and allows us to be able to jump and hang on their coattails to take our careers into the NBA as well. So, yeah, I would have never thought I've been doing it for 27 years. When I started, you hope you can do it for a little bit of time, and what a great experience it is. You adapt to the analytics of the game because the game has changed. I remember being a young coach, and I was out there. I was the workout guy. I was the guy out there banging Antonio Davis before every Raptor game and pushing Chris Bosh off the block and so on. And heck, I can't do that now. You got to have the young guys. You got to have the gray hair guys. And I'm the gray hair guy now if you count beard, because I don't have anything else to show for it. But you
You
adapt
look
to the
good.
game.
You
I
look good.
become an offensive guy. I'm like an offensive coordinator now, and the NBA has changed that way too. Whereas you're just not coaches. We got a defensive coach. We got an offensive coach. We got guys that are in charge of player development as well. So it's become very specified, and I've learned to adapt along the way.
One last thing about the NBA, throughout the season, like, do you get a chance to show love to all the other Canadians and connect? Like, I know it's a busy season, but are you pretty aware of like a Canadian you're going to match up with every night and get a chance to say hi? Like, how does that look?
Absolutely. Yeah, Matty, that's when I was coaching the national team. That was a big thing for me because yeah, I know I'm going through the rigors of an NBA season and how constraining the time is. And I know the players are going through that. So I would use that time before a game or after a game to catch up with all of our Canadian guys. Anytime we faced Tristan Thompson or Corey Joseph or Dwight Powell, Kelly Olynyk, you always talk to those guys. And then the relationship that I have with those guys still is something that, we still connect. Either after the game, we'll look for each other, or before the game during warmups, we'll talk. Even I talked to Andrew Wiggins every single game before in the playoffs this past year, and
Nice.
he was going through some tough times, and it was good to be able to share some time with him and talk to him pregame all the time. And Jama Mahalea was a coach, fellow Canadian, so I would talk to him and Danny Langford, as I mentioned earlier, Simon Fraser grad who's on the medical staff with Golden State Warriors too. So I got a chance to connect with them. But yeah, always, there's a Canadian connection across the league, and we try to keep it together.
I like to hear that. Jay, obviously here on Canada Hoops, we love to talk Canada basketball, and we've touched on a lot already. For many of us who follow you or know you, this is how we associate you with basketball in Canada through the national team. What do you think about the statement, or what does it mean to you personally when, people regard you as an all-time great for Canada basketball, both as a player and a coach, man?
No, I honestly, I'm humbled by it because, again, you don't ever do things. You don't ever coach in that for any of the accolades. You do it for the love of the game, and I do it for the players. I honestly, like I said, earlier in the podcast, my whole thing was being an Olympian. I wanted to be an Olympian. I wanted to represent my country. I wanted to represent the game of basketball. And when that happened, and I stopped playing the game, everything shifted for me. And my whole next thought was, how can I help 12 more players be able to do what I did? And that's why I wanted to coach our national team. And the 2000 Olympics to me was the epitome of that. So much more fun for me to be able to take 12 players and go through that experience than it was even playing in the Olympic Games. Just because you knew you're going to change their lives. And when you can look at that team, and you mentioned some of these guys already. Meeks is still involved with Canada basketball. Rowan's involved with Canada basketball. Steve is still involved in the game. Sean Swords is a coach. Peter Grassi was a coach for a long time. David Daniels was a coach. Every one of them stayed in the game. Sherman Hamilton still calls games for the Raptors and is on the broadcasting. It changed their lives as far as what they were going to be able to do with the sport. And we had the reunion in 2020, the 20-year reunion. It was during COVID, so we did it all on Skype, and we all got together and would just talk about the different experiences that we've gone through because of those Olympic Games and at the Olympic Games. And to me, that was like that was it. That was everything for me, was being able to share that moment with those 12 guys, because they're all very, very special. They're all family to me.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say like your role as a coach meant more to you than your role as a player.
I think it's probably more recent, but I don't get to do what I did as a coach if I didn't have the career that I did as a player.
Right.
And the tutelage under Jack Donahue. Jack was my coach every single year on the national team, and how he cared about us more as people than he did as basketball players is something I've tried to just carry through my whole coaching career. And I'll tell you that in the biggest thing, you can talk about the wins that we had in the Olympic Games and that, but that team was more connected than any team. You talk about building a team. I would say that was the number one thing that we did. Everybody understood their role. Everybody was together. We just had a great bond together. And I would say that if I could hang my hat on anything, it would be how that team was one and together. We had the other athletes in the Olympic Village looking at us in envy with how close we were to each other and how committed we were. Not one guy would go for a meal at the Olympics. There's a food house. You can go eat anytime you want. Not one guy would go to eat unless all 12 went. And they would all wait for each other, and they would walk as a unit in the village and sit down at a table. Other teams are sitting, the two guys over here, two guys over there, sit with the track and field people from their hometown. Our guys were so committed to each other, and it showed on the court, and it was just one of the greatest experiences I've been involved in.
Yeah, I mean that team is iconic, and I think you and the players know how special that group was for the game in this country. I mean, I had Sherman join us early on in the podcast, and he raved about it. I wonder, can you share the Sean Swords story where You weren't cutting them, like you had to take them. Can you let us know
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, that was always the toughest thing, was cutting somebody. And I remember sitting in Vancouver before we were going to go to play exhibition games in Australia so we could get used to the travel. Although nobody expected us to go to the Olympics, even the Australians, and that's why they invited us down. We were fodder for them so that they could get ready to host their own games. And we were down to 15 players, and the coaching staff got together and we decided who we were going to cut. And I went in and I cut the first two guys, and then Sean Swords came in as the third guy I was going to cut. And I started talking to him about how much you're the hardest worker, you're a team guy, you dive on the floor, um, you, you just you're a great teammate. You work harder than anybody else in that. And I said, never mind, you can leave. And he knew he was getting cut, and he left the room without me cutting him. And I remember going back to the other coaches, and the other coaches were like, "How'd it go?" I said, "I don't know. We're in trouble." I said, "I couldn't cut him." I started explaining why I was going to cut him, and it was against everything I believed in. And so I didn't cut him. And I remember Scott Clark, who was the coach at the time, said, "Coach, this is just exhibition games down there." He said, "You don't need to take me. You don't need an extra coach. You take an extra player so you get a better feel for it." And he gave up his seat on the flight so that we could take 13 players. And then I remember calling the Australia and said, "We're going to bring 13 players." And they were like, "No, you can't. The numbers will go from 4 to 15. What are we going to do?" The extra player would have to wear a 0 or a jersey with no number on it. I was like, "That's fine." And I remember telling Sean Swords that the next day. I said, "Hey, listen, I'm sorry about yesterday. I said I was trying to cut you and I couldn't. And but you're going to travel, but because you're the 13th guy, we don't have a number for your jersey, so it's going to have to say either nothing or it's going to have a 0 on it." And right then, I knew I made the right call, because his comment back to me was, "If the jersey has Canada on it, I don't care
Hell yeah.
about whether there's a number on it or anything." He says, "I'm representing Canada." And it was unbelievable. We go through 5 games down there, and we're in a battle. We win 2, and back and forth. And he doesn't really get to play a whole lot, except I lose my mind after game 4 because we got beat bad. And no, the players just kind of didn't play the way I wanted to play, and so on. So I had a team meeting, and I started yelling at guys, and I said, "Who's going to play the right way?" And 5 hands went up, and I said, "Good, you guys are starting."
Nice.
And then I went to our manager. I said, "Who did I say is going to start?" And he said it was Johnny Lee, who's in the NBA with the Toronto Raptors still. I said, "Johnny, who did I say is going to start?" And he goes, "You don't want to know, coach." He said, "You don't want to know." Because I picked the first 5 guys, and Swords was one of those guys. And as a coach, I was like, I'm trying to prove a point. I can't go back on what I said. So sure enough, I start Sean Swords, and he goes, and they played the way I wanted to play. They put their hands up. They were committed to it. And the ball went side to side. We changed sides. We got in the paint. We kicked it. And I remember Swords after that game, we beat Australia in Australia on the court where the Olympic Games were going to be played. And Swords had 9 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists. He was one away from a triple-double in every category. And we got in a fight pretty much every game, because Australia kept taking us to all these banquets. We had no money. We had no money for food or anything. So we'd go to the banquets so that we could eat free. And meanwhile, they're bringing their team up there, parading on, "This is our Olympic team. And we just want to thank Canada. Canada will not be at the Olympics, but they're here to play us in these exhibitions." And we were like looking at them going, "What do you mean we're not going to be at the Olympics?" And they're like, "Well, the United States is going to be the one team out of the Americas, and it's probably going to be Brazil or Argentina as the other team." And it just fueled our guys more than anything. So we'd go out and play these guys who thought we were just fodder, and we'd get in a fist fight every single game, but we proved, and we beat them twice. And sure enough, they pick us to be the opening night game in 2000, and we did not forget what they had done. They brought us over to try to beat us up. We actually beat them up, and sure enough, we beat them. But the sword story, to end it, I went back to the coaches, and as we were putting together the Olympic team, I said to the coaches, I said, "I know who our first guy is. It's Steve Nash. And I know who our 12th man is. It's Sean Swords. You guys can help me pick the other 10. But that's who our team is going to be built around, our top guy and our bottom guy. And that's how we're going to roll."
I mean, great story, and I just I just remember seeing a guy like that on the team who obviously is not going to get a lot of minutes, but you knew he was a hard worker. I think that just is a great example for any player, right? Obviously, like you said,
Yeah.
Steve's the man, and you need him to play well to make it go. But there's a role for everybody, and I've heard that story a little bit. I love it. Swords is still obviously deep into the game. His two daughters are great players.
Right.
It's
Yep.
very cool to see. Um, I just wanted to touch about since Jamal's in the finals and everyone's rallying that. You coached a young Jamal Murray in
Hmm.
2015 at the Pan Am Games. Can you just give us a little reflection on him and the season he's had and um,
Yeah.
about to hopefully? I'm cheering for Denver because of Jamal, so hopefully they can win
Yeah.
it. Just some Jamal thoughts
Yeah.
there, Jay.
It's funny. We played them the last game of the regular season in Denver, and I grabbed him after the games, and I said, hopefully we see you in the Western Conference Finals. And he said, I would love that matchup.
Nice,
And it was just Jamal in a way where he was basically saying to me two things. He was saying, I would love it for you guys to get that far, but I'd also love it because I know we're going to kick your ass. And that's who Jamal is. He's got a confidence about him. He's always had it. But that confidence comes from him preparing. He's a hard worker. And, between his workouts and what his dad helped him go through and all the coaches that he's had, there's a belief that he's had. And he had it when he was an 18-year-old kid playing for me in the Pan American Games. And it was like, I was almost like, when are you going to put me in long enough instead of being a backup to Corey Joseph so that I can take over this game? And sure enough, he had 20 points in the second half in the fourth quarter of that game. There were NBA players on that team. There were guys who had played in Europe on that team, and Jamal dominated that game down the stretch. And it was it was so what I'm seeing right now and what I see him do in the NBA, I saw at 18. And it's funny because one of the stories when I was coaching in Phoenix, I got the job there in Phoenix as an assistant coach, and we were preparing for the draft, and they were going, we like these two kids, Marquise Chris and Dragon Bender. And I said, well, where's Jamal Murray going? He's probably going to go after those guys, but these guys are going to get. I said, I'm not a proponent of, like, you guys are scouts and you have your people that do their job. But if I've coached a kid, I can tell you if I think he's pretty good or not. I've coached Jamal Murray. I think he's really good. And
right?
they said, well, we think he's a little bit of a duplication of Devin Booker. And I was like, well, that one turned out pretty good because I would say that they're pretty close. They're both very elite scorers and very good players. Would it not be a pretty good thing to have two of them on your team?
No kidding.
So I could see it from the beginning. He's got that thing about him, and it's fun watching him play. And when his confidence gets going, it hardly ever fails. He's always very confident. He's a tremendous player.
Yeah, I'd love to see them win it and have another Canadian win a championship. I wanted to ask you about just having the opportunity to coach Brady Heslip, your nephew.
Yeah.
Brady, loved his national team time, and he just spoke about making the team at a young age, and making uh, the coaching staff have no choice and don't worry about any kind of nepotism. Factor. Just talk about that relationship and just seeing him thrive and play for the country.
Yeah, it was great for me. And you know what? I think the one thing that I was a beneficiary of was that I wasn't the national team coach when he first started playing. Like, he
Right.
started playing when Leo was coaching, and it was great because I kind of inherited a team, and no, it wasn't, he's on the team because he's my nephew, and so on. And to be honest, I think I was probably harder on him because he was my nephew than, I could say things to him knowing that we're family and we're gonna get over it. Whereas you're not hurting the feelings of another player. It was so fun to coach him because he had seen me go through all these things. His dad was a great player at the University of Guelph, and I went to the final. I went to the Elite Eight when he was at Baylor, and just watching his success. And I remember talking to Jerry Stackhouse at one point about how much he loved coaching him at the 905, and anytime you can coach family and go through things together, it's a very, very special. It's a very special time.
Yeah, Brady spoke highly of it too, and I just thought that was, a cool thing to see over the years. I'm just wondering, Jay, like it's a crucial summer for the senior men's national team, obviously with the World Cup um, coming up. Like, how much do you stay on top of the program still? I know, like, have they reached out to you at all in any kind of role? I'm curious about that.
No, not really.
I
No.
don't necessarily mean for this summer, but as of
Yeah.
lately, you
Not
know,
no, not lately. I've stayed involved with, because Nate Mitchell, who I helped get into Charlotte, he was at the Hornets for a couple of years there. Watched him grow as a coach, and he's been with the team, and we stay in touch because obviously he knows I've got a connection with Shea and Jamal and all these guys from the times that I coach them. So there's a piece of me that is invested into all those players through all the years, and um, I still follow the program and still want them to do extremely well. And the NBA is such a tough thing because it's so demanding. And even as a coach now, I had 2 weeks and we're back in the gym and we're getting summer league and getting going. And the NBA, when I first started, you could take the summers off and do national team and go and travel and be committed for 2 full months. Those days are gone, and we know that as coaches, but it's also the same for players. And then you run into contract situations, and guys like Trey and I talk, coaching him now, like he's in a contract year. Can he afford to play if he doesn't have a contract? And will he
right.
contract get done in time? Dwight Powell's in the same boat. These are guys that would be great players for our country, and sometimes you're not allowed to have them play. So it makes it tough, and it hasn't changed, Matty, throughout the years. Jamal McGlure went through it a bunch of times with us, and then I think his interest kind of waned at the end after us trying. But he was in a contract year; he was tired. Rick Fox was in the finals with the Lakers and just didn't feel like he could commit the summer, 2 more months in the summertime after playing into June. So everybody's got their own reasons. Everybody's got their reasons to be involved. But to be honest, it was the greatest part of my coaching career was coaching our national team and loving every minute of that.
Yeah, I think most people are aware of the players' situations. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of weeks with the run that Denver's making. Like, will Jamal be available this summer? And everyone
Yeah.
wants to see him and Shea in the backcourt. And
Yeah.
I guess that'll be up to Jamal and the Nuggets, obviously, to see how that looks. And there's always a lot of roster and camp speculation right now. You got a finals pick, Jay? Denver or Miami? Who are you going with?
Well, it's tough because I obviously like Jamal and want him to feel the success, but at the same time, I spent 2 years with Caleb Martin and Cody Zeller
Yeah.
in Charlotte, and both those guys were my workout guys. Like I worked them out at times. I worked them both out, and when you work with somebody every day like that, and they get moved to another team and they have success, you kind of cheer for them. Cody Zeller, I'm going to his wedding later this summer. So there's a part of me that has a connection with those guys that I worked with in Charlotte. And there's part of me with a connection with Jamal, and I'd love to see him be a champion.
So no pick either way.
No
You're
pick.
Yeah,
I cheer for
wow.
the individual guys. I hope they all play well. Yeah.
Yeah, let's I think everyone wants to see a great finals. Okay, Jay, who is your top 5 or favorite 5 of all time for Canada basketball?
Ooh, boy. Obviously, it's hard because for me, because I could give you a list of guys that I've coached, of 5 that I've coached, and I could give you a list of 5 that I played with. Um, I'm going to say Billy Robinson is one of them because Billy was a guy that he was one of the first guys who went to Simon Fraser University. He was the starting point guard on the national team in 1976 in the Olympics. One of the guys that I saw, a guy that ended up turning around and being one of my biggest fans. Like he loved me because I followed his footsteps and cheered for me. So I'm going to say Billy Robinson. Eli Pasquale, because he passed me the ball all the time. He was just a fierce competitor. We were both
Right.
from Ontario. We were the starting backcourt for years. We would walk around Europe and people would chant our names. We would walk around Canada and nobody would know who we were. But we just kind of embraced that together. Obviously, Steve Nash. I've named 3 point guards, all from Vancouver Island. How about that?
Hey, I mean, it's your five, Jay. It's your
Yeah.
five, man.
So after that, man,
You can put yourself in there.
I don't put myself in there.
You've
I
been
mean,
mentioned in it, just so you know, like a lot of guests. You've been mentioned, and rightfully so.
well, they were definitely your older guests, right? They
Or
were your
guys, or
older.
guys that played for you and know the
Oh
history.
yeah,
They showed
yeah.
they showed you a lot of love. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would say after that, man, I'm going to go with another point guard and probably one that a lot of people wouldn't do, but um, no, I'm gonna change. I'm gonna go with Kelly Olynyk because
Nice.
I think
Yeah.
he's part of the new wave of guys that really wanted to play and always wanted to play. I've known him since he was before he was 10, and his love for the game, he's never changed. Every teammate that's ever played for him loves him. So I would say he would be on that list. And I'm going to go with another point guard. I'm going to go Shea, just because
Like
I've
it.
watched him, and he's right now he's close to being an MVP in our league, and he's Canadian, and he went through the system. He was a young player on our national team at one point. I tried to get him. Suspend him for a game because I thought he missed the bus, but he had gone over early to work with Steve Nash, and I looked like a fool. But he just loves the game and he wants to get better. So I'm gonna say he would be the fifth guy.
That's a great five. I love the history with that, and we got new wave. I mean, Shea,
Yeah.
in my opinion, and probably the opinion of many, but the program for the senior men's team is going to go as far as Shea takes it.
Mhm.
Steve Nash is one of my all-time faves, and I'm a big Kelly fan too. Um, I think Kelly is big time in FIBA, and he's going to be important for the team this summer. And I have good connections to Kamloops too, so I've always
Yeah.
followed Kelly. Jay, any shout outs or thank yous, man, before I get you out of here? And again, it's been an honor to have you join us on
Yeah,
Canada
no, I
Hoops, man.
appreciate you. I appreciate what you do, man. Really, I do. Um, being in Sacramento, being in Charlotte, I'm not in Canada a lot, and even I don't even get back to visit a whole lot in the summer times anymore. But through the internet and through your tweets and Instagrams and stuff like this, I get to stay in touch with Canada basketball. I'm excited about the CEBL. I can't say enough about how excited I am to have pro basketball in our country. Um, it's long overdue, and Mike and those guys, John Lashaway, what they've done to promote the game in our country is huge for us. Um, all the players that I coach, man, and the future players that want to represent Canada. I wish it was as burning a desire for everybody as it was for me and the players that played in the 80s and 70s and 80s, because it was everything for us, and we loved doing it. We did it. We had no money. We had 2 to a room. We had 3 practices a day. It was never fun, but it was the hard work through all that, things that weren't fun, that made it so enjoyable.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, I just want to, tell everyone support the CEBL. Super important.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that level of basketball in different communities across Canada. It's been great watching them already in Calgary. They have a game tonight against Niagara.
There you
Uh,
go.
I'm not sure. I might try to get to it after we're done here. Um, yeah, appreciate you, Jay. All the best to you and your family. We wish you another great another great season in Sacramento this upcoming season. Light the beam, baby.
Yep. Well, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a challenge. We had the number one offense last year. People are gunning for us, so it's going to be a challenge. But we're excited about where we're going, and hopefully we can keep this thing rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. That wraps up another episode of Canada Hoops. I want to thank the icon Jay Triano for pulling up. Thank you for listening. Download, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcast. Keep supporting Canada basketball, and we will see you on the next episode.